I'm Angelina Hollister, 39, and I spent 17 years earning command in rooms where respect had to be proven twice. For years, I gave the Army everything I had: my time, my safety, my youth, and parts of myself I didn't know I was losing. But when a Navy SEAL grabbed my collar in an airport lounge and decided I didn't belong there, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who had no idea who you really were? Tell me in the comments you're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. My father never told me the Army would be easy for a woman. He told me it would be worth it. For a long time, I believed those two things were connected. They're not. I grew up in Bridgeport, on the south side of Chicago, in a house that ran on discipline the way other houses ran on small talk. My father, Robert Hollister, retired Master Sergeant, United States Army, was not a sentimental man. He was a precise one. Sentiment softens the edges of things. Precision holds them exactly where they are so you can look at them clearly and decide what to do next. That is the house I grew up in. That is what it made me. On a weeknight in 1994, I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with my homework already finished, and my father unfolded a topographical map across the oilcloth and said, "Read the terrain before you read anything else." He walked me through elevation lines, grid squares, contour intervals, dead ground. I could not pronounce the word defilade, but I understood what it meant before the lesson ended. The ground that hides you, if you know how to use it. I filed it. I did not yet know what I was filing it for. He did not read me fairy tales. He read me field manuals as vocabulary, not performance. He taught me that the person who controls the terrain controls the outcome. That dead ground never needs to announce itself, because its position is already secured before anyone has thought to look. I was 8. I absorbed it the way children absorb everything that comes from someone they trust completely. My mother left when I was 6. My father did not discuss it. He cooked dinner, signed the permission slips, drove me to school, attended every parent evening with his back straight and his attention complete. He was present in the way that men trained to operate under sustained pressure are present. Fully, without waste. What he was teaching me at that kitchen table was not only terrain analysis. He was teaching me what it looked like to remain functional inside a world that would not always balance the ledger in your favor, and how to do excellent work anyway. I did not choose the Army the way most people choose a career. I recognized it. In November of 2003, my father took me to a Veterans Day ceremony at the VFW post in Bridgeport. He had taken me every year since I was old enough to sit still. I was 17, a senior in high school, already holding the possibility of West Point in my peripheral vision. The way you hold a destination you have not yet decided is real. The guest speaker that year was different from the retired colonels who usually talked about service in the abstract, courage and sacrifice, burnished until it no longer had texture. Her name was Colonel Margaret Decker, United States Army, retired. She was 45 years old, and she stood at the podium without notes and without the performance of authority that people insecure in their authority often produce. She did not speak about breaking barriers. She did not invoke historic firsts. She spoke about doing the work sequentially, without sentiment, without the embellishment that comes from needing the audience to feel something specific. She described leading an element through a mission she could not name in a country she could not name, and the only thing she emphasized was what it had cost and whether it had been worth it. She said it was. She said it plainly with the certainty of someone who has already done the accounting and is simply reporting the result, and I did not move for 40 minutes. After the ceremony, my father steered me toward her. We exchanged fewer than 10 words. She looked at me with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who evaluates people professionally. She handed me a card with West Point's admissions office address on it. She said, "Call if you decide you're serious." I kept the card for 5 years. I did not call. When I was ready, I showed up. For the first time in my life, I saw a woman who carried authority without announcing it. The kind that does not require a room's permission to exist, because it was built in rooms the audience never saw. I had only the certainty that I recognized it, the same recognition I had felt at 8 years old, looking at a topographical map and understanding dead ground before I could say the word. In the autumn of 2006, I was a second-year cadet at West Point, a yearling in the Academy's language, and Colonel Decker returned as a visiting instructor for a leadership evaluation exercise. Roughly 40 cadets were being assessed. I was in the middle of a simulated ambush when the designated squad leader froze. The particular paralysis of someone who had drilled for a decision 100 times and could not locate it under actual pressure. Without being asked, without theatrics, I gave 3 clear, sequential orders that broke the element out of the kill zone. I did not raise my voice. I did not wait for authorization. The squad followed because I sounded like someone who knew what happened next, which is the only credential that matters in the first 15 seconds of contact. Decker was 30 meters away in the tree line, watching the entire sequence. She did not step in. Afterward, she pulled me aside. You didn't lead loudly. Good. The cadets who make noise when they lead are compensating for something. You're not. Don't let anyone convince you that's a flaw. She did not create that quality in me. She was confirming it existed and telling me to protect it. A teacher gives you something you did not have. A mentor shows you what you already possess and tells you not to let anyone take it from you. West Point Commissioning, May of 2008. I was 22 years old. My father sat in the front row in his best clothes, his posture as correct as the day he had left the service. Across the room, Colonel Decker attended as a guest. She was not required to be there. She came anyway, and I noticed it, and I filed it. My father pinned the gold second lieutenant bar on my uniform. His hand did not shake. He did not cry. He looked at me and said exactly 8 words. Now you earn it, every day, no exceptions. I nodded. That was the entire exchange. Across the room, Decker raised her program once, a private acknowledgement that meant more than anything louder would have managed. I noted both moments and filed them together, because they belonged together. The bar weighed maybe half an ounce. The weight of everything I had traded to earn it, the relationships I had let go quiet, the version of my 20s that existed in some parallel life where I had chosen differently, the proximity to my father I had exchanged for 4 years inside the discipline of an institution that was not yet certain what to do with me, was something else. By 2009, I was a first lieutenant assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. I had just completed the Special Forces qualification course. I was the only woman in my cycle who finished. Nobody in the processing room treated my completion as remarkable, including me. I picked up my orders, walked outside to a payphone near the administration building, and called my father. The call lasted 4 minutes. I told him I had the tab. He said, "Good, get some sleep." I hung up. I stood in the dark outside the building for a few minutes. Not with grief, not with triumph, not with the release I might have expected. Just with the full weight of what I had chosen and the clarity that I would choose it again. Then I went to sleep, because that was what the situation required. The payphone receiver settling back into its cradle, the fluorescent light flickering once. My silhouette already moving away into the dark. I learned to protect my work the way a lawyer learns to document a contract. Not because I didn't trust the institution, because I understood it. By 2013, I was a captain assigned to a classified special mission unit under Joint Special Operations Command, operating from a forward operating base along the Syria-Iraq border. The work did not have a public address. The operations did not generate public records. The people who knew what I was doing and how well I was doing it could be counted without removing your boots, and most of them held security clearances that would never appear in any file a promotion board would open. I had given the institution 12 years of myself by that point, and I had begun to understand that the institution's ledger and my ledger were not going to balance the way I had assumed when I stood in the dark outside that administration building in 2009. In a combined element debrief inside a prefab room at the forward operating base, fluorescent lighting, no windows, the particular exhaustion of people who have been operating at high tempo for too long, I sat at the table as the officer who had planned and supervised the reconnaissance operation being reviewed. A civilian intelligence liaison who had not been on the operation opened the session by directing his questions to the male captain seated to my left. That captain had run the ground element. I had controlled the planning cell. The entire architecture of the operation had come out of my work. He answered as though the assessment were his. He did not correct the record. The omission was passive and economical. Not malicious, just efficient in the way that invisible hierarchies are always efficient. They do not require anyone to consciously decide to perpetuate them. They run on the same momentum as everything else in the room, carried forward by the assumption that the visible person is the relevant person. I delivered my own assessment when there was space for it. Precise, comprehensive. In the final written report, it was attributed largely to the other captain's name. I did not file a complaint. I went back to my quarters that night and revised my documentation practice systematically and without anger. From that point forward, my name was embedded in every operational paragraph I authored, in language specific enough that it could not be absorbed into someone else's record without deliberate rewriting. I did not fight the system's blindness. I routed around it. Fighting a wall wastes energy. Finding the door preserves it for the work. 2015, Fort Liberty, North Carolina. I was 29, a captain with a strong operational record and a file that was largely classified. My chain of command had recommended me. My performance was not in question. But the Army Major Selection Board does not have access to everything, and in my case, the most important parts of my record were exactly the parts they could not read. I was passed over for that cycle. The administrative officer told me the board didn't have what it needed. I asked whether my file was complete. He said yes. I thanked him, walked to the parking lot, sat in my car for 11 minutes, and drove home. I did not sit there performing composure. I sat there being composed, which is different. I called Colonel Decker that evening. I called not to vent, but to process, to say it to someone who had the full context and would not mistake my flat account for the absence of feeling. She listened all the way through without interrupting, without inserting reassurance into the spaces where I was thinking. Then she said, "The system wasn't built to see you clearly. That doesn't mean you're not clear. They'll see you when they're ready. Make sure you're still there when they are." I was still there. 2016, MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. I was 30 years old, a newly promoted major, standing outside a SOCOM-level briefing room with my new major's oak leaf on my collar. A 2-star Army general walked past, glanced at me, and said, "Sergeant." His aide corrected him in 2 words. "Major Hollister, sir." The general nodded once and continued walking. The entire exchange took 4 seconds. In the briefing that followed, I was addressed correctly for 3 hours. I performed precisely. The briefing was effective. But the 4 seconds stayed with me, the way small things that carry large implications tend to stay, not because of what they are in isolation, but because of what they are when you add them to everything that preceded them, one by one, year by year. He didn't mean anything by it. That's the part I've never been able to explain to people who haven't lived it. And it would almost be easier if they meant something by it. Intention creates accountability. Blindness does not. He went home that night without knowing he had added a notch to that tally. His brain had not registered me in that corridor as a field grade officer. It had registered me as a woman and defaulted to the most common rank its pattern recognition had available. Not hatred, not agenda, just the automatic failure of a system trained on data that did not include me. Because it required no apology and generated no accountability and would never appear in any record anywhere. It was in some ways harder to carry than deliberate hostility would have been. Deliberate hostility you can name. This kind of blindness just accumulates, quietly and without ceremony, until one day it is very heavy. Eastern Syria, 2017. I was 31, a major, senior element leader for our JSOC Special Mission Unit at a classified forward operating base. A combined operations briefing in a reinforced tent. Multiple special operations forces elements from different branches. The particular density of a room full of people who have all been doing serious work long enough to be certain of their own expertise and impatient with anything that wastes their time. A coordination officer arrived late. He scanned the room, saw me as the only woman present, and said, "Could you get me a coffee? Black, no sugar?" Before I could respond, Navy Commander Daniel Holbrook said, without raising his voice or turning fully from the map he was studying, "That's Major Hollister. She's running your fire support today. If you'd like coffee, I'd suggest you find the mess tent." The coordination officer reddened. Holbrook did not make eye contact with me afterward to verify that I was grateful or to receive any acknowledgement of his intervention. He returned to the map. He treated it as a routine correction because to him it was. I had not met Holbrook personally before that briefing, but I understood something about him in that moment. He did not correct the dismissal to signal virtue. He corrected it because the record was wrong, and a wrong record in a tactical environment costs lives. He stated a fact. That was all it was to him. Because it was that simple to him, it meant more to me than any performance of solidarity could have. 3 weeks later, Signals Intelligence identified the exfil point for Holbrook's platoon as compromised 40 seconds before his element reached the breach. I called the halt over comms, flat, precise, no hesitation, over his initial objection that they were on timing. I redirected the entire fire support architecture in real time, coordinated an alternate exfil under contact, and brought everyone out. Nobody died. Holbrook's after-action report credited JSOC fire support element. He found me afterward in a quiet corner of the debrief tent and said, "I owe you one." I said, "You don't. That was the job. You don't ask for acknowledgement in this work. You ask for the next mission to go clean. That's the only currency that matters." Holbrook walked ahead of me out of the debrief tent into the Syrian night. Neither of us spoke. The silence of two people who understand each other without requiring a conversation about it. The tent flap swung closed behind us both, and I understood that I had, in the span of 3 weeks and one critical call, established the most important professional relationship I would carry into the next chapter. November 2025. I was 39 years old, a lieutenant colonel, traveling under a civilian alias, en route to a classified pre-deployment briefing at MacDill Air Force Base. A delayed connection rerouted me through Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I took a corner table in the Delta Sky Club, ordered a black coffee, and opened a paperback. I chose the corner table by habit. Clear sightline to the entrance, back to the wall, no one positioned behind me. 12 years of classified service makes certain choices automatic. They stop feeling like choices at all. They just become the shape of how you move through a room. I was in jeans and a dark jacket, no visible identification, nothing on my person that announced what I was or where I was going. That was intentional, and it had been intentional for so long that it no longer required a decision. It was simply the natural shape of the work. You learn to occupy space without marking it, to be present without being legible to people who have not been briefed to read you. I had spent 12 years developing that skill. I had not anticipated it becoming a liability in a domestic airport lounge on a Tuesday afternoon. The 3 men at the bar had been there when I arrived. Navy SEALs, in civilian clothes. I placed it before I consciously registered it, the way you identify a vehicle type before you read its markings. Back from a leave rotation. Loud in the particular way of people recently released from the sustained compression of closed quarters and operational tempo. There is a specific quality to that loudness. It is not aggression, exactly. It is the sound of men who have been controlled for a long time and are temporarily not. One of them noticed my corner table, said something to his teammate I could not fully hear. The teammate, Marcus Webb, Petty Officer First Class, 34 years old, I would learn later, snickered. The third, the youngest, shifted in his seat, less amused, more cautious. I noted the distinction and returned to my paperback. The first man walked over. His name was Brett Halverson, Petty Officer First Class, SEAL Team 7, 32 years old. He leaned across the table until his face was inches from mine. He twisted his fist into the lapel of my jacket, the way you might grip a collar in a demonstration, controlled enough to signal control, forceful enough to make the point. He said, flat and certain, "Wrong lounge, sweetheart. This one's for active military." I did not move. I did not speak. I did not blink at an unusual rate. I have spent 12 years learning that explaining myself to strangers is a waste of breath, and every single year of that training was present in that corner of the Delta Sky Club. The 39 years before those 12 were there too. The kitchen table in Bridgeport, the payphone outside the administration building at Fort Liberty, the debrief room where my name went into someone else's report, the general's 4-second sergeant in a MacDill corridor. All of it organized, quiet, and ready. Brett Halverson was not a villain constructed for this moment. He was a decorated operator who had spent 14 years in a world where authority is always visible and labeled, a world of uniforms, rank insignia, and the immediate legibility of hierarchy. In civilian clothes, with no marker he could read, he defaulted to what his environment had taught him to do when context was absent. He assumed I was the person in the corner without a uniform, so he assumed I was someone who had wandered into the wrong space. His error was not cruelty. It was a complete failure of imagination, made physical and public in a way he would not be able to undo regardless of what happened next. The lounge was watching by then, the way a room goes quiet when the pressure in it changes and everyone present understands that something is about to tip. I kept my hands flat on the table. I held his eyes. I gave him nothing to work with. I had learned early that giving nothing is its own kind of power if you can hold it without flinching. The entrance opened. Captain Daniel Holbrook walked in with a briefcase and jacket over one arm, on the same delayed Tampa connection. 8 years since Eastern Syria. He had made captain, 06, Navy, the equivalent of an Army colonel, and he carried it the way he had carried commander, without announcement, without weight beyond its own competence. His eyes moved across the room by instinct, the same automatic scan I had performed when I chose my corner. He saw my posture first. He had sat in enough briefing rooms with me across 3 deployments to recognize it across a crowded space. Back straight, no wasted movement, fully present in the particular way of someone who is not where they appear to be. Then he saw Brett's fist in my collar. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He put his hand on Brett's shoulder, not violently, but with the complete, unhurried authority of a commanding officer who has never in his career needed volume to establish himself, and said, quietly and with absolute precision, "Petty officer, do you know who you're talking to?" Brett's hand dropped. The room went still. Webb and Kowalski froze, drinks suspended halfway to their mouths, 2 men who understood immediately what had just happened and what it meant for the man standing in front of me. Holbrook did not wait for Brett to answer his own question. He turned to me, in full view of everyone in that lounge, and said, "Colonel Hollister, ma'am, I apologize for my man." He used the correct informal address for a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He said it in the room, at full conversational volume, where every person present could process exactly what they were hearing and understand what it meant about who I was and what had just occurred. I received it without expression, a single nod. I smoothed my collar with one hand, closed my paperback with the other, picked up my bag, and walked toward the gate without looking at Brett Halverson. I did not take my coffee. I did not pause. I did not give Brett the relief of a reaction or the satisfaction of a backward glance. I walked out as though I had other things to do. Because I did. My exit was the most powerful thing I did in that scene. More powerful than anything I could have said. More powerful than anger or explanation or the kind of confrontation that would have given Brett something visible to respond to. It was not restraint. It was command, the full weight of 12 years of classified service compressed into a single, unhurried walk toward a departure gate. And everyone in that lounge understood what they had witnessed, even if they could not name it. You know it when you see it, the authority that does not require your permission to exist. At gate B24, I sat down. Bag down. I looked at the tarmac through the floor-to-ceiling windows and did not move for 6 minutes. I ran it the way I run every after-action. What happened, in sequence, who was present, what was said, what it meant, what it cost. I noted that I was not angry in the way most people would be. The anger was there, but it sat underneath something older and heavier, exhaustion, the kind that accumulates over 17 years and does not announce itself until a moment like that, one compresses it into the present tense and forces you to finally look at it. The worst part wasn't his hand on my collar. The worst part was that I wasn't surprised. I opened my phone. I did not call anyone. I put it back in my pocket and boarded when the gate opened. My face reflected in the plane window as the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the Atlanta skyline blurring behind my reflection, the image steady and composed, already moving toward whatever came next. Airborne to Tampa, I called Lieutenant Colonel James Caldwell. Bear, as everyone called him, my JSOC counterpart at Fort Liberty. The closest thing I had to appear outside my chain of command, the one person I spoke to, without needing to manage how I sounded while I was doing it. He answered on the second ring. I gave him a sequenced, uneditorialized account. Who, what, when, in what order, how it resolved. The same structure I would use for an operational summary. No adjectives I did not need. No editorializing. At the end, I said, Holbrook was there. He handled it. Bear went quiet for a beat. He asked, "Are you good?" I said, "I'll tell you when I figure that out." He did not push. He did not offer reassurance I had not asked for or try to extract something more from me in real time. That is why I called him. Bear Caldwell understood the difference between a flat account and the absence of feeling. And he understood that the flat account was not minimization. It was the container I used to hold feeling steady while I worked out what it meant. He received what I gave him and waited. the way you wait for a call sign to come back on the radio. You hold the frequency open, and you do not fill the silence with noise. Bear was 43 years old, Army Special Forces, JSOC counterpart, in a parallel lane of the work we both did in rooms with no windows. He had known me for 6 years. In that time, he had learned, as everyone who stays close to me eventually learns, that my flat account is not the same as composure. It is the architecture I use to hold something still while I examine it. He did not mistake the architecture for the absence of what it was containing. The pre-deployment briefing at MacDill was 3 hours long that afternoon. I was at the head of the table: map overlays, secure terminals, operational framework, rules of engagement, personnel assignments, and I was sharp. I was effective. I had been doing this work for 12 years, and the briefing room is one of the places I am most entirely myself, because it is a room that requires exactly what I have spent my entire adult life building. Whatever had happened that morning in Atlanta did not enter the briefing room with me. That is not compartmentalization in the clinical sense. It is the discipline of knowing what belongs where, and of understanding that doing excellent work is not something you defer until conditions are comfortable. If I had waited for conditions to be comfortable, I would never have finished the Q course. After the session, the Joint Special Operations Command, J3 representative, pulled me aside and confirmed the SEAL platoon attachment for the task force. Petty Officer First Class Brett Halverson's element, SEAL Team 7, would be chopped to my command for the deployment cycle. The name landed quietly. I confirmed receipt of the assignment and walked out. I was sitting with the knowledge that the man who had twisted his fist into my collar that morning would be taking orders from me in approximately 7 days, and I sat with it the same way I sit with everything that matters, until I understood what it meant and what it required of me. There was no version of that knowledge that changed my approach to the command. The command was the command. The standard was the standard. Those things were not subject to revision. That evening, in a government-rate hotel room near MacDill, I called my father. The call was warm and brief, the way our calls always are, not because we are not close, but because we have the same relationship with efficiency and the same understanding that love is not measured in duration. He asked how the trip was going. I said, "Fine, long day." He asked if I was eating. I said yes. I did not tell him about the airport. I did not tell him about the name that had appeared in the briefing. I said I would call after the workup. He said, "You know where I am." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed with my boots still on. He was 75 years old, and he had never once told me to quit. He had also never fully known what I had been absorbing since 2008. The slow, steady weight of it, the running tally I had never agreed to keep, the way the institution asks certain people to spend more than others and calls the spending endurance and pins a tab on your shoulder for it. I had never found a way to tell him any of that without it sounding like a complaint. I do not complain to my father. He raised me not to. It is one of the gifts I'm most grateful for, and one of the things that has sometimes cost me the most, in ways I do not yet have clean language for. I sat on the edge of the bed, with my boots still on for a while. The boots were a specific detail I noticed, the body's decision not to stand down, not yet, not fully. 17 years of being ready when the room requires it. I set the bag down by the door and looked at the standard government-issue furniture and the curtains drawn against the Tampa streetlight, and thought about the man who would walk into a classified briefing room in 7 days and see me at the head of his table. I thought about what he had done and what it had cost him without his knowing it yet. I thought about what I was going to do with the command, and the answer was the same it had always been. Exactly what was required, at the highest possible standard, without deviation. Later, with the laptop open on the desk and the task force documentation folder closed in front of me, I ran the full ledger, not out of self-pity, with the deliberate, honest accounting of a well-conducted after-action, where the point is not to assign blame, but to understand what happened and what it cost so you can make better decisions going forward. The 2013 debrief, where my work went into someone else's report. The 2015 board passover. The 4-second sergeant at MacDill in 2016. The coffee request in Eastern Syria in 2017, and every other moment between that one and this one that I had filed and never fully totaled. I added Atlanta. I totaled everything. The conclusion was not rage, it was recognition. I had been spending reserves I had not agreed to spend, the daily cost of absorbing what should have been corrected, of letting things pass that added up over time into something with genuine weight. That habit had served me operationally in rooms where making it personal would have been a distraction. It had cost me something personal that I had not yet fully named. I needed to understand the difference between strategic restraint and chronic absorption. They are not the same thing, and that night in Tampa, I finally admitted I had been confusing them. I've spent 17 years being the most capable person in rooms that couldn't see me. That night in Tampa, I finally asked what that was costing me. Not with bitterness, with accounting. I opened the folder and got to work. The screen light was sharp in the darkened hotel room, and the city of Tampa was quiet behind the window. I had already made the decision that mattered most, and now I was doing what I had always done when the decision was made. Moving forward in the dark without waiting for the light to change. 7 days after Atlanta, Brett Halverson walked through the door of a classified briefing facility at MacDill Air Force Base and found me at the head of the table. He had 7 days to construct a version of events he could live with. Whatever he had built in those 7 days, the SIF dismantled it in the first 3 seconds. I was mid-sentence with Bear, reviewing a map overlay when the SEAL platoon filed in through the secure entrance. I did not look up when they came through the door. I finished my sentence. I set down my pen. I looked at the room, all of it, every face in sequence, the way I open every briefing I have ever led, and I made direct eye contact with Brett Halverson for approximately 1 second. The same look I had given him in the Delta Sky Club. Level, unreadable, complete. Then I moved on to the briefing. He saw me. I know because I watched his posture change in the peripheral attention I maintain, regardless of where my eyes are directed. 3 degrees, maybe 4, the involuntary adjustment of someone who has just registered something significant and is working to hold their external bearings steady. The silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel on my collar. Service uniform, not jeans and a dark jacket. The head of the table, not a corner seat with a paperback and a coffee I never finished. The briefing room where he would receive his operational orders for the next 9 months of his life. It was enough. I moved on. The briefing was 37 slides. I knew every one of them. The command structure, the task force composition, the operational framework, the rules of engagement, the communication architecture, the decision authority matrix. I had built all of it. I walked the room through it at a pace that did not invite interruption, answered 3 clarifying questions with precision, and concluded on schedule. Brett Halverson was one of 19 people in that room. I gave him the same standard I gave every one of the other 18. I had made the decision during the week between Atlanta and that SIF. The airport would not enter the professional space. Not because it did not matter. It did matter, and the matter of it had sat with me in a Tampa hotel room until the small hours of the morning. But I had decided that my command was the answer, and that my command would be louder and more durable than anything I could say in a hallway. The decision was not passive. It was the most active choice available to me because it required that I be excellent every single day, without the option of a bad one. After the briefing ended and the room cleared, Brett caught up to me in the corridor outside the facility. He started to speak. "Colonel, I need to—" I stopped walking. I turned to face him. I waited. He could not complete the sentence. The airport existed between us without being named by either of us, a weight in the air of that corridor that required no vocabulary to be felt by both of us. I let the silence run 4 full seconds, not to be cruel, but because anything I said into it would have made it smaller than it was, and I was not interested in making it smaller. Then I said, "Your platoon briefs at 0600 tomorrow, Petty Officer. I'll see you there." I turned and walked away. I did not look back. The corridor was narrow enough that my footsteps were the only sound in it for the length of time it took me to reach the outer door, and I did not hurry them. I have never hurried my exit from a room in my professional life, and I was not going to start in a corridor at MacDill with Brett Halverson watching. The non-confrontation was the confrontation. I had set the terms, and the terms were clear. There was no personal reckoning available here, no conversation in a corridor that would settle this, no moment of mutual acknowledgement that would close the accounting cleanly. There was only the job, and the job would do everything that needed doing, more thoroughly and with more permanence than anything I could have said. I had spent 17 years watching institutions fail to deliver on promises they made with language. I was not interested in making him a promise with language. I was interested in showing him a standard with evidence day after day in conditions that did not allow for ambiguity, until the evidence was sufficient. Evidence does not require belief. It produces it. I told Bear about the corridor exchange that afternoon in the small office we shared in the SOCOM compound. He listened the whole way through, then said, "You could have said something." I nodded. "I know." He asked if I was certain about the approach. I said, "The deployment will say everything I'd need to say, faster and cleaner." He looked at me for a moment with the particular attention of someone who is deciding whether to press further, and then decided not to. That was one of the things I valued most about Bear Caldwell. He understood when the decision was made, and when additional commentary was the wrong use of the time he had. Bear did not argue. He understood that the approach would cost me nothing, because I was going to be excellent regardless. And excellence does not require the audience's cooperation, and it would cost Brett everything, because Brett would have to work beside what he knew about himself every single day until the deployment was done. He would have to make a decision about who he was in response to that knowledge. I had no control over which decision he made. I only controlled the standard. The workup ran 2 weeks, late November into early December of 2025. I commanded with the same quiet precision I had brought to every environment since 2013. Webb and Kowalski adapted to my command style within 3 days. Experienced operators recognize competence the way water finds level. Efficiently, without ceremony, because the alternative is operationally costly, and they understand that clearly. Brett was professionally correct in every observable way, but conspicuously over-careful. He over-reported. He double-checked orders he had never in his career needed to double-check. He anticipated criticism that did not come. He was watching me the way you watch unfamiliar terrain, waiting for the detonation, scanning for the sign that tells you where the ground is not what it appears to be. It did not come. For Brett, I believe that was more disorienting than any confrontation would have been. You can brace against something visible. You cannot brace against the steady, unrelenting evidence that the person you wronged simply keeps doing excellent work regardless. I didn't need to make it hard for him. He was making it hard for himself. That's always how it goes with people who know they were wrong. The knowledge sits in every room with them. It accompanies every task. It evaluates every decision they make in light of the one they know they got badly wrong, and it does not allow for the comfortable distance of time until something happens that earns that distance honestly. I was not doing that to him. He was doing it to himself. The distinction mattered to me. I needed to be the commanding officer of this task force, not the architect of his discomfort. His discomfort was his own project. Mine was the mission. The workup concluded on schedule. The task force integrated and was ready. Brett executed every training sequence with the clean precision of a man working as hard as he has ever worked. Jaw set, eyes forward, every checkpoint delivered on time, every standard met without being asked twice. Not yet certain whether the standard he was holding himself to would be enough to close the distance between what he had done and who he intended to be. But holding it anyway, because holding it was the only honest option available to him. I recognized that quality. I had been living it for 17 years. January 2026, the task force deployed to a classified theater. For the first 30 days, Brett Halverson was professionally correct, tactically sharp, and personally coiled. He brought no errors to the work and no ease to the environment. He executed orders with the precision of someone who understands that the margin for anything else has been used up. And he carried the weight of what he knew about himself into every operational space, the way you carry something you cannot put down because you have not yet decided what to do with it. Some people carry that kind of weight by working harder. Brett was one of them. In late January, his element was moving on an intelligence-driven target. I was running the operations node in the Joint Operations Center with Bear and the task force staff. ISR feeds on multiple screens, the particular sustained attention of a senior commander who knows that the distance between a good outcome and a catastrophic one is often a single correct observation made in time. 12 minutes into Brett's element's movement, I caught an anomaly in the feed, an unexpected signal pattern at a structure adjacent to the primary target. The timing of the signal, its geometry relative to Brett's approach vector, the shape of it against the baseline we had been tracking for 6 days, every element of it pointed to something that should not be there. I called a halt over the radio, flat and direct. All elements hold. Do not move until I clear the adjacent structure. Hold. Brett objected. He was on timing. The window was narrow. The intelligence picture had been solid. I told him to hold. He held. 4 seconds of silence on the net while Brett Halverson processed the instruction from a commanding officer he had not yet fully reconciled with himself. 4 seconds in which the platoon froze in position. 18 people trusting the decision of one. while I trusted a call I had made from a feed that had given me a shape I recognized before I could name it. 4 seconds is a very long time when you are stationary in a field position. It is also exactly long enough for 3 armed men to emerge from a structure and confirm the call. 40 seconds later, 3 armed combatants emerged from the adjacent structure on the flank of his approach route. A compromise that would have contacted his platoon from a direction they were not positioned to absorb. The target was reassigned, the approach modified, and the element executed clean. No casualties. The mission package closed successfully, and Brett's platoon came back whole. Post-operation, Brett submitted his debrief accurately and completely. He did not mention the ISR call by name. He did not have to. What mattered was that he had seen it happen in real time, had heard my voice call the halt before he could see the reason for it, and had watched the reason emerge 40 seconds later from a structure he had been about to move past. He knew what a good call sounded like in the field. He had heard hundreds of them across 14 years of operational work. That was one. He knew it. That night in the platoon bunk room, as Brett broke down his kit in the focused quiet of post-operation, Marcus Webb said, without weight, the way he stated any operational fact. She got that ISR anomaly in about 40 seconds. I've seen guys take 4 minutes to flag that. Ryan Kowalski said, I've seen guys miss it entirely. Brett said nothing. He finished his kit. He got some sleep, but he heard it. Competent people always hear the accurate accounting of a situation, even when they're silent in response to it. They file it. Eventually, if they are honest, they let it change them. By February, the task force was in the planning cycle for a complex multi-element operation. Brett raised a route modification that diverged from my approved plan. Under any other commanding officer in his career, the move would have been routine. Experienced SEALs push back on route plans. It is part of what makes them valuable in joint task force environments. Under me, given the weight of what he was still carrying from Atlanta, he framed it with the careful over-precision of someone who is not entirely certain of their standing. He was not wrong to have the idea. He was wrong to be uncertain about whether he had the right to voice it. That uncertainty was the last residue of Atlanta, and it was costing the task force the full value of his operational experience. I noticed it. I did not comment on it. The response to that kind of residue is not a conversation. It is the next decision, made at full standard, in the open. I reviewed the modification without comment. I studied it for 20 seconds, the route, the ISR overlay, the timing implications, the contingency exposure. Then I said, take it to the full element brief. I want the rationale with supporting ISR. He presented it. The modification was sound. I adopted it with one alteration and attributed it in the briefing. Based on Halverson's route analysis. In the room, without ceremony, the same way I credited any sound work from any member of the task force. I credited the work. That's what I do. It had nothing to do with him personally, and everything to do with who I am and what I believe about running a team. I think that was when it finally registered for him, not that I was managing him, not that I was performing generosity, but that I was simply doing the job at the same standard I had always done it, regardless of what had happened in an airport lounge in Atlanta. The standard was not contingent on his conduct. It was mine, and it belonged to me. Late February. I stepped outside the Joint Operations Center after a long shift. The night sky of the classified theater overhead, that specific darkness that exists only away from any ambient light source, the stars dense and indifferent. Brett came outside without knowing I was there, and stopped when he did. He started to turn back inside to give me the space to not impose. I said without looking at him, "You can take a break without relocating, petty officer?" He stopped. He sat about 8 feet away. A full minute passed in silence that was not comfortable, but was not impossible either. Then he said carefully, "You're a good CO." I did not respond. He nodded once, not expecting an answer, not seeking one, and went back inside. I stayed outside for another quarter hour, the night sky overhead, the low hum of the forward operating location's generators, the only sound. It was the first human thing he had said to me since Atlanta. Insufficient in scale for everything it was standing in for. Real in kind. I received it exactly as it was, not as enough, not as absolution, but as the first evidence of a man beginning to honestly reckon with himself. which is where all genuine change starts before it has produced anything visible or nameable. By March of 2026, Brett Halverson had been under my command for nearly 4 months, and the airport had not been mentioned by either of us in any operational environment. What had happened instead was something more durable than a conversation about what happened: the slow, evidence-based construction of professional respect. Built through clean operations and hard calls and the daily accumulation of a standard held without variation, mine, and the daily recognition of what that standard was. His. In a difficult terrain objective, that March, Brett's element was mid-operation when a primary communications failure severed the link between my Joint Operations Center and his team in the field. He had 2 choices: abort or use the secondary communications protocol I had built into the operational plan as a contingency for exactly this scenario. He used my secondary protocol. He executed it correctly and without hesitation, the mark of someone who had internalized the plan thoroughly enough to trust it when the primary path disappeared beneath him. He brought the element back on target, completed the mission, and re-established comms within 11 minutes. In the post-operation debrief, standing in front of the room, Brett said, "CO's secondary protocol held. Built well." He did not elaborate. He did not frame it or contextualize it or add anything to it. He said it on the record, in the room, in front of every member of the task force who would carry that account forward into the official record. He credited the work. I noticed it the same way I notice everything, quietly without making a point of it, filed alongside every other piece of evidence I had been accumulating since January. He had crossed from passive execution to active affirmation of my methodology in the professional language that mattered most, the language of the record set in the room where it would stand. In this work, that is not a small thing. A few days later, Bear and I were alone in the Joint Operations Center after the rest of the task force had cleared out. He said, with the quiet of genuine observation rather than agenda, "You know, he's becoming a good element lead under you." I said, "He was always a good element lead." Bear went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "That's not what I meant." I said, "I know what you meant." And I went back to the map. He was always a good element lead. That had never been the question. The question had been whether his conduct as a person would ever rise to meet his capability as an operator. And the answer was beginning to emerge in the way that genuine answers always emerge, not in a single moment of declaration, but in the accumulation of small, verifiable acts. I was watching it. I was not announcing it. The distinction mattered to me then. It still does. Late March. A corridor outside the platoon debrief room. No one else present. Brett stopped me. He stood at a respectful distance and looked at the wall beside us rather than at my face. Not evasion, I thought, but the particular focus of someone who is choosing their words carefully because they matter, and he knows they matter, and he has not done enough of this kind of choosing in his life. He said, "I've been in this work a long time. I thought I knew what I was looking at. I was wrong." He did not ask for anything. He did not wait for absolution or for me to complete the exchange in some way that would relieve him of the weight of it. He walked away. I watched him go and did not call him back. It was as close as he would get to a direct apology, and it was the right kind. It named what he had done. It named that it was wrong. It asked for nothing in return. My silence was not withholding. I did not need his apology to understand the situation or to know my own value. I had not needed it for a single day of the deployment. The terms between us simply shifted as quietly and as permanently as terms shift when one person decides to stop pretending something did not happen and names it plainly instead. Early April, the final complex operation of the forward rotation. Planning session, full task force. Brett functioned in that session as a full and unguarded contributor. Not over-carefully, not apologetically, not with the anxious precision of a man monitoring for punishment. He asked questions. He offered analysis. He pushed back on a timing window with crisp rationale and a clear supporting argument, the way a good element lead pushes back when the plan needs adjusting. I listened, assessed it, adjusted the window, and said, "Good catch." Nothing more. The session ended on schedule. The element was ready. I didn't need him to become my friend. I needed him to be competent, honest, and safe in the field. By April, he was all 3. That was enough. That was more than enough. The operational planning map on the board, every element in position, every route confirmed, every contingency documented in my hand, The work itself as the image of what had been built across the months since a corner table in the Delta Sky Club. Solid ground that did not require anyone to speak of it to know it was there. Late April of 2026. The forward deployment rotation was in its final weeks. 6 successful mission packages. No casualties. 1 equipment loss with no personnel impact. I had been in a classified theater since January with a task force I had built and a standard I had held. And the two things together had produced exactly what I had told Bear they would produce. Evidence, accumulated and irrefutable, speaking in the only language that matters in this work. I was writing end-of-rotation personnel evaluations in my workspace at the forward operating location. Early morning, the compound settling into the particular quiet of a deployment that is nearly done. The quiet of a place that knows it is about to be vacated. The evaluation for Brett Halverson was in front of me. I wrote it the way I write every evaluation, honest, rigorous, fair, and specific enough to be useful to the next commanding officer who works with him. It documented his tactical capability, his adaptation under Joint Task Force command structure, and, in the precise language of a professional assessment, his growth in operating within a complex multi-element environment under a commanding officer whose methodology differed significantly from what he had previously encountered. The airport was not mentioned. It was not relevant to a professional evaluation. A professional evaluation documents who a person is in the field. That is all it does. Everything else belongs somewhere else, or belongs to no record at all. I submitted it without showing it to anyone. He earned the words in it. Everyone. A secure satellite call came from Bear, coordinating redeployment logistics, and then carefully, the way Bear delivers things he knows will land with weight, telling me that the Army Colonel Selection Board report had been submitted to Headquarters, Department of the Army. He did not have the official results, but my packet had been strong and he believed I was on the short list of likely selects. He delivered this matter-of-factly, the way he delivers everything, precisely, without editorial. I went quiet for 3 seconds, longer than my usual operational pause, and said, "Okay, let me know when the list drops." He started to say something. "I thought you'd be more," I said. "Bear." He stopped. I said, "I'll be more when I land." He understood without my explaining it. You cannot fully receive something of that weight in a satellite call from a classified theater. The information was real. The feeling it deserved was real. But feelings of that magnitude need solid ground and proper light and the full context of a life that is not currently running a deployment. I was not willing to receive this one incorrectly, just because Bear was kind enough to give me the news early. Captain Holbrook came through on a liaison visit in late April, command coordination for the final rotation phase. 5 minutes in a cleared corner of the common space, coffee in hand, the efficient use of a short window that 2 people who work this way have learned to make sufficient. He asked how the rotation had gone. I gave him an honest summary, operational outputs, platoon performance, no casualties. He asked specifically about Brett. I said, "He did his job." Holbrook nodded. "I heard. Good." He started towards something larger, something closer to the full accounting that the November airport corridor had never quite become, and I stopped him quietly. "You handled it. It's done." He nodded. We finished our coffee. The airport was not discussed again, because there was nothing left in it that required discussion. He had done what he was supposed to do in that lounge. He had done it correctly and without hesitation. The chapter was finished, and the next one was already beginning, and I needed room for what was coming. The final night before redeployment, I sat outside at the edge of the forward operating location. No phone, no documents. The classified theater's night sky, the dense stars of a place whose name I cannot say. The low sound of the compound settling. I ran the full arc, Chicago, West Point, the Q course, the 2013 debrief, the 2015 board, the MacDill corridor in 16, Eastern Syria in 17, Atlanta in November, the SCIF, the JOC, every ISR call, every assessment, every time I had been looked through and kept working. I did not wrap it up neatly. It does not wrap up neatly, and I have learned to distrust the versions of my own story that do. But something had settled differently. The way a deployment always settles on the last night before you go home. Something that was tight in you for months, loosening by a degree. The beginning of the exhale that will not be complete for several days still. I asked myself a question I had been carrying since that Tampa hotel room. What would it have cost me to announce myself? And what had it been worth, all of it, to not? I've spent my entire career in the space between visible and invisible. And for the first time in 17 years, I was genuinely curious, not regretful, just curious about what the next version of that looks like. Because something was ending, and something else was about to start. I just didn't know its name yet. May 2026. The task force rotation concluded. I boarded the military transport back to the United States with 17 years of service behind me, 5 months of this deployment alongside me, and something waiting at Fort Liberty that I had not yet held in my hands. On the transport, I slept for 4 hours, the first 4 consecutive hours I had managed in 6 weeks. I woke before the rest of the aircraft and looked out the small oval window at cloud cover below and did nothing for 45 minutes. No phone, no documents, no briefing folder, no assessment, no task that needed completing. Just the hum of the transport and the gradual, cellular process of re-entering a world that was not asking me to be classified. The slow lifting of the operational posture that becomes so habitual, you stop noticing it until it begins to lift, and you feel its absence like something laid down after a long carry. I was, for the first time in months, simply a woman on a plane going home. You don't fully exhale on the plane. You start to. The full exhale takes a few days. But the plane is where you first remember what it feels like to just be a person, without the sustained readiness that becomes invisible until it isn't there. At the departure staging area at Fort Liberty, as Brett's SEAL element loaded equipment for redeployment back to their home command, I was standing near the building entrance when he stopped, turned, and walked back toward me. He came to a full stop at the correct distance, squared up, and rendered a salute. Not the quick, perfunctory kind of hallways and logistics, the kind that means only that the protocol has been observed and nothing more. This was a held, deliberate salute, the kind that requires intention, the kind that means something is being communicated in the only language this world has that cannot be misread or reinterpreted or mistaken for something other than what it is. He held it. I returned it. He dropped his hand first, as protocol requires, because I outranked him. He picked up his bag. He did not say anything. He boarded his transport. He didn't explain. He didn't try to compress 9 months into language, or reach for the words that the corridor outside the debrief room had already exhausted its capacity to carry. He gave me what he had, a proper salute, held for a beat longer than regulation requires. It was the most honest thing he had said to me since Atlanta. And it was enough. It was actually enough. The salute was the apology his words in the corridor had been unable to fully carry. And more than an apology, it was recognition, rendered in the vocabulary that has always mattered most to me. The job, done correctly and completely and without being asked. I received it exactly as it was given, which is the only way to receive something that has been given honestly. Bear handed me the colonel's selection notification in hard copy in a small office in the JSOC compound that afternoon. Not framed, not ceremonial. A printed page in a manila folder, because that is how Bear operates and that is how I would want it. I read it. I sat with it for a moment. He asked, "You want to call Decker?" I thought for 2 seconds and said, Yeah, I do." Colonel Margaret Decker, retired, 68 years old, answered on the third ring. She had been 45 in the VFW post in Bridgeport when I was 17 and had not yet found the language for what I recognized in her. She had handed me a card with West Point's admissions address and told me to call if I decided I was serious. She had attended my commissioning when she was not required to. She had counseled me after the 2015 board passover from a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and had said the system wasn't built to see you clearly and make sure you're still there when it's ready. She had known me for 22 years. I said, "I made Colonel." She was quiet for 1 second. Then she said, "I know. I've known for 30 years." I laughed. Short, real, unguarded. The kind of laugh that comes only when something releases that you have been holding without knowing how tightly. Bear heard it from across the room. He smiled at his desk without looking up because he understood what that sound meant, and he was glad it had arrived. The laugh was the payoff, not the promotion. The release that comes when the person who saw you first, before you could see yourself clearly, gets to hear the confirmation that she was right. Decker's answer closed the arc that had opened in 2003 in a VFW post in Bridgeport. And it closed it with the quiet completeness of something that was always going to end this way. I drove to Chicago for a few days of leave. My father opened the door, looked at me, and said, "You look tired." I said, "I'm good, Dad." He stepped aside. I sat at the kitchen table, the same oilcloth, worn at the corner where I used to prop my elbow at 8 years old, trying to read contour lines I couldn't yet fully interpret. He made coffee and set it in front of me without asking, because he has always known what I need before I ask for it. After a while, I said, "I got, Colonel." He sat down and said, "I know. Bear called me." I stared at him. He shrugged with the particular economy of a man who has never wasted a movement in his life. He said, "You wouldn't tell me right away." I shook my head. I almost laughed again. Then he said, quietly and without performance, "I'm proud of you, Angelina. I've been proud of you since Fort Liberty in 2009. I just wait for you to be ready to hear it." The kitchen table, the regimental plaques on the wall behind him. The man who had taught me to read terrain at 8 years old and said, "Now you earn it at 22 and get some sleep," when I called him in the dark from a payphone in North Carolina with the tab and no one to celebrate with. The weight of 17 years in both directions at once, everything it had cost, everything it had built, held by him in Chicago without complaint, because he had understood all along that some things need to arrive on their own schedule, and he had been willing to hold the space until mine was ready. The next morning I took a walk with no destination, no route, no tactical purpose at all. The streets of Bridgeport in early May, the light that comes with a city morning before the day has fully assembled itself. Children on bicycles. A veteran at a bus stop who gave me a nod, not knowing my name or my rank, just recognizing something in the way I carried myself, the way you recognize certain things before you have language for them. I nodded back. I walked the whole neighborhood. I came home to my father's front step and sat in the May morning light with coffee in both hands and thought, not in summary, not in sermon, just in clear and steady recognition. I didn't just endure it, I built something with it, and whatever comes next, I'll build something with that too. If you have been the most capable person in rooms that couldn't see you, if you've been carrying something quietly for a long time and doing excellent work regardless, I'm not going to tell you it gets easy. I'm going to tell you it gets clear. There is a difference. Clear is something you can work with. The people who doubted you, dismissed you, or put their hands on your collar when they should have known better, they don't get to decide what you are. They never did. You already decided that. You decided it every time you kept going, on my father's front step, coffee in both hands. The May morning light of a neighborhood I had known all my life came down around me, and I finally understood that I had been the answer to every question anyone ever had about me. Quietly, finally, I knew it. If my story hit close to home, I want to hear yours. Have you ever had to protect your peace before someone finally respected you? Have you ever had to let your actions speak because words were not enough? Share it in the comments. And if this reminded you of your own strength, hit like, subscribe, and come back for more stories about standing your ground and knowing your worth.